When Better Call Saul returns for its 5th season this month, it will tie Breaking Bad in number of seasons. And with season 6 slated to be its last, the show is going to pass the show it spun out of.
Okay.
Now, this isn't a crazy development in the history of TV. Frasier lasted just as long as Cheers, The Jeffersons ran 2 seasons longer than All in the Family, and I bet you've never even heard of The Tracy Ullman Show, which is where The Simpsons got started. But none of those shows are dramas, and none of them are nearly as serialized as Breaking Bad, which told the singular story of a high school chemistry teacher turned meth kingpin.
I'm in the empire business.
On top of that, Better Call Saul isn't even a proper spin-off. It's a prequel, an origin story for a side character in the original series. Breaking Bad mined drama from the slow descent of Walter White into darkness. We had a vague idea of where he was headed, but there was always a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could pull out of his tailspin. That's what made every Cranston scowl that much more effective, as he swallowed hard and took another step over a line we thought he wouldn't cross. But we know exactly where Saul Goodman ends up. We know who he becomes in colorful detail. In the words of Mr. Andy Greenwald,
one of the things that I have used to kind of just knock Saul down a peg is that knowing where things are going hurts the drama and hurts our emotional investment. There's a way to flip that, which speaks again to Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould's just diabolical Heisenbergian genius.
So, how does Better Call Saul do it? How is it keeping up with Breaking Bad? And is what it's doing even more impressive? The answer might come down to tragedy. There are going to be some spoilers for Better Call Saul, but also the point of this video is that we already know where the story's going, so I don't know, make your own choices.
Please, for my own sanity.
Better Call Saul is technically a prequel, but its tone actually makes it feel more like a sequel. The show follows Jimmy McGill, the con man turned upstart lawyer who will one day become Saul Goodman.
Hi, I'm Saul Goodman. Did you know that you have rights? The Constitution says you do.
When we meet up with Jimmy, he's a struggling public defender, trying desperately to make a name for himself the right way, and leave his life of petty crime and conning behind.
And it's about time that I started to make both of us proud.
Better Call Saul starts as a redemption story, in stark contrast to Breaking Bad's race to the bottom. You get the sense that there's a cyclical nature to Jimmy's life. The thrill of the con leads to guilt over his actions, leads to a shot at an honest life. Likewise, Mike Ehrman...
How is it again?
Ehrmantraut.
Right. Likewise, Mike is also trying to turn over a new leaf. As we find out in the first season, he was a crooked cop in Philadelphia before coming to Albuquerque to start a new life with his son's family. Of course, with both characters, we know it's not meant to last. And not just because this is a prequel. Both Jimmy and Mike come from sordid backgrounds, and both have the very human temptation to seek the more exciting and more profitable path.
And now that I'm doing the job I want, I get the full 1,500. We agree upon that?
Even over the course of Breaking Bad, we witnessed them corrode, crossing lines we didn't think they would.
Yes, okay, I had you will lift your cigarette, but what made me?
We've seen them slip before, both in their future and their past. And because of that, their falls from grace in Better Call Saul don't feel cute or clever. They feel
Inevitable.
Inevitability is a much more foreboding emotion than shock. There's no hope, no escape. Instead of avoiding the fact that we know that Jimmy will become the scumbag known as
Saul?
It's all good, man.
Better Call Saul leans into it. Now comes the part where you go, wait, Jackson, that doesn't sound very dramatic or exciting. Where are the drugs, sex, and violence? And while there is some of that in Better Call Saul, and I could go on and on about the beautiful camera work, the pitch-perfect acting performances, and how the show puts together the best damn montages in the business, in fact I made a whole video about those montages, you'd still have a point. Better Call Saul isn't the drug-dealing thriller its predecessor was. I mean, there are scenes that are straight-up compilations of people highlighting things in doc review.
Working every day, catch up with me on the weekend. Tell your friends, holla at them later, you'll see them.
But Better Call Saul isn't about the plot. It's about coloring in characters, and specifically about exploring tragic irony. It might sound counterintuitive, but tragedy doesn't need a twist. Romeo and Juliet might be the most famous tragedy of all time, and Billy Shakespeare tells you his star-crossed lovers are going to die in the 8th line. Knowing they're doomed actually makes a story that much more tragic. I bet you knew that the ship was going to sink in Titanic, but it's a cruel bit of irony that we watch two people fall in love and feel primed to break free of their lots in life before they hit that pesky iceberg. It's what makes the biggest Game of Thrones tragedy still gut you even after the initial shock wears off. Damn it, Rob, why couldn't you just marry Waluigi Frey and get your freak on the side like everyone else? Knowing the ending can sap a story of its dramatic tension, the unknown element, but it actually amps up its tragedy. And a show can capitalize on that with rich writing. Knowing where Jimmy ends up could be a weakness for Better Call Saul, but the show has turned it into a strength, creating layers of inevitable loss. Jimmy and Mike's tragic sense of destiny comes from their fully realized characters. While they were bit players in Breaking Bad orbiting around Walt, Jesse, and Gus, Jimmy and Mike are given the space in Better Call Saul to become more. Let's start with Mike. In the Season 1 episode 50, we learned that Mike was a crooked cop in Philadelphia. When his son Matty joined the force and hesitated while accepting a bribe, the other corrupt cops turned and killed him.
Even looking like you're doing the right thing to those two meant that he wasn't solid. I broke my boy.
In Better Call Saul, Mike knows that he can't make up for what he did, and doesn't even believe he's deserving of redemption. So he goes down to Albuquerque to take care of his daughter-in-law and granddaughter, the innocent bystanders affected the most. His guilt drives him to make as much money as he can to take care of them. And he does this the best way he knows how, making use of his skill set in surveillance and combat, leading to a life of crime. As we watch him chase the money, we know that his sins will catch up with him. We know that his path doesn't heal his soul, but further erodes it. And that, on top of it all, he will die without having left any of that money for poor, sweet Kaylee Ehrmantraut. Like Mike, Jimmy's best skill is pretty shady. His ability to scam and bend the rules.
Yeah, but did he collect?
Did he collect? Slippin' Jimmy had it dialed in. Okay, one good fall, he'd clear 6-8 grand.
Being a lawyer is a decent way to apply these skills. And Jimmy is a good lawyer, but he's a great con artist. There's always an internal pull we're watching at work in Jimmy, knowing he's an oval peg in a round hole. He almost fits. The reason he doesn't quite fit is because of his brother Chuck. Throughout the show, we see Jimmy try to gain Chuck's validation and support, but at every turn, Chuck refuses.
He'll never change. Ever since he was 9, always the same. Couldn't keep his hands out of the cash drawer.
Jimmy is always living in Chuck's shadow, a titan of a lawyer who has quietly worked to undermine Jimmy's career at every turn. He convinced his firm not to hire Jimmy even after he turned his life around and worked in the mailroom while getting his law degree.
And Slippin' Jimmy I can handle just fine, but Slippin' Jimmy with a law degree is like a chimp with a machine gun.
He refused to let Jimmy use his own name for his law practice as it would dirty his own.
That's my name, I was born with it.
And punished Jimmy's love interest Kim for his brother's actions.
You are such an asshole.
Why? For pointing out that her one mistake was believing in you?
Chuck even takes Jimmy's first big case away from him.
You're not a real lawyer.
Of course, Jimmy is far from blameless, but that's not the point. Jimmy's legitimate attempts to become a lawyer are blocked and derided by his only family, and this forces him to fall back on being a con artist. Jimmy is trying to live a good life, but is invited into the mud by his brother, which in turn makes Chuck even more stubbornly oppose him in a vicious, self-fulfilling circuit. Even once Chuck dies at the end of Season 3, his presence looms over Jimmy, especially manifesting itself in his relationship with Kim. By the end of Chuck's life, Jimmy wanted to prove him wrong and become an honest lawyer out of spite. Kim represents that kind of honest lawyer, and Jimmy's desire to prove Chuck wrong and be with Kim blend together to the point that they resolve a fight in their relationship with this exchange.
You still want to be a lawyer?
Yeah.
Well, we can start with that.
Jimmy wants so desperately to stand on his own 2 feet and be seen as worthy that he resorts to embracing his dark side, which is what pushes away the one person who wanted to help him in the first place.
Jimmy, I have been on your side since the day we met. You confessed to a felony on tape. I'm there.
I'm good enough to live with, to sleep with, but God forbid you should have an office with me.
This is tragic irony at its best. Think back to Star Wars and Anakin's turn to the dark side. He went there in order to save the love of his life, and in the process killed her by giving her the deadly disease, the loss of a will to live.
She's lost the will to live? What is your degree in poetry?
In Better Call Saul, every aspect of Jimmy and Mike is a double-edged sword. The skills they need are exactly the ones that make their dreams impossible. Knowing they will fail doesn't make each development less dramatic, but instead makes it more powerful. Inevitable tragedy isn't the only thing that makes Better Call Saul great. There's a shelf life on dragging out tragic irony before it just gets sad.
All wrapped up in your sad little stories, feeding off each other's misery.
But creators Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould seem to be well aware of this challenge. And as the show is primed to pass Breaking Bad in number of seasons, Better Call Saul has set up a parallel story through a number of flash forwards. In the future, we see Jimmy on the lam in Omaha, set after the events of Breaking Bad, essentially paying for his actions. These flash forwards are sprinkled throughout the series, and although we don't know what will happen with them yet, they seem to directly raise the question of redemption. They highlight Jimmy's actions in the broader context of history, where he's going and where he'll end up. Can he change? Can he break the cycle? Is there hope? We usually vaguely know the ending to stories. None of us really thought Walt or Tony Soprano were going to ride into the sunset and escape their life of crime. we often have a sense of whether there will be a happy or a tragic ending.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.
But what makes tragedies like Better Call Saul so powerful isn't the broad strokes of the story being told. It's the details to that story. When we watch, we want to compare ourselves to Jimmy, to see who we want to be or what we're terrified of becoming, to test our own mettle in a safe simulation and see if we could have chosen any better. But the greatest trick that Better Call Saul pulls is to put you so squarely in Jimmy's perspective that you couldn't have chosen anything else if you were him, because what he does is so true to his character. It's the intricacies of the dramatic irony that give the story its impact. If only Chuck hadn't been such a dick. If only Mike hadn't gone quite so far. If only Jimmy could have resisted his Saul urges just once. If only. But we know that it's in Chuck's nature to never trust Jimmy. We know that Jimmy is Saul Goodman. We know Mike wants to give the best possible life to his granddaughter, his own soul be damned. Here's Andy Greenwald again.
If you know where things are going and you're confident that people will want to see that, then you have this enormous luxury of showing all the steps.
And Better Call Saul is all about those steps. Whether it's a long montage of Jimmy making copies, watching Mike slowly build a tire trap, or seeing their souls slowly erode underneath. It's not just about watching the birth of Saul Goodman. It's about understanding what he lost in Jimmy McGill.
Wait, Jimmy, what?
It's all good, man.